one site that's been lost in New Jersey, a historical site known as the Zabriskie Tenant House, which is located in today's Paramus, New Jersey. The Zabriskie Tenant House was one of the last surviving structures of an African-American community dating back to the mid-19th century known as Dunkerhook. Initially constructed for his son Christian, well-known area settler Andrew Zabriskie built and lived in this structure until the family's relocation in 1820. And then at this time, and in 1820, this led to the freed slaves from the Zabriskie family of slaves to eventually occupy this home after they left. As they would occupy the home, a free community of African Americans who were freed slaves would begin to grow around it in the 1830s, which would eventually lead to 6 different households, 43 residents, and an African Methodist Episcopal church and cemetery by the year 1860. So this was an overall growing community, and this house kind of served as a symbolism for that growing sense of community in the African American freed slave community. This community would eventually stay intact up until the 1930s, where redevelopment would eventually begin to disperse the community by the middle of the 20th century. Some ways and efforts that to preserve this property were built by members of the community in the area who felt that they believed that its historical impact on the African American community basically made it necessary to continue to stay intact. So some efforts to preserve. Attempting to build 2 new homes, Quattro 4 LLC first purchased this property from its previous owner, who was not an original descendant of its original occupants, because she was needing money for assisted living. So, however, there were numerous efforts to preserve this property. For example, Ted Manville, who was a neighbor to the property, filed a suit against the company and the Paramus Planning Board in 2011, hoping to avoid the demolition approval of this property. His argument was that there was a lack of review on the property by the Paramus Historic Preservation Commission. And Manville, at this time, also created the Dunkerhook Stonehouse Preservation LLC himself. And the part of the goal of this organization was to accept donations towards legal costs in supporting the effort to keep this building intact. By September of 2011, however, the New Jersey Superior Court denied his appeal of the decision to demolish the property, but Quattro 4 LLC had still not purchased the property from the previous owner. By April of 2012, however, Quattro 4 LLC had purchased the property, had full ownership rights, and the property was ultimately demolished on July 13th, 2012. For its ultimate demolition, however, there were numerous attempts to move the property to nearby Bergen County College that would have been funded both by private parties and government grants to fund this move due to its historical impact that the property had on the community. These talks would eventually fall through, however, as the developer knocked the property down despite agreeing to move the house to the campus 3 weeks earlier. So we know that this property has been demolished already. However, there are ways that we can preserve sites that we lose so that they don't just entirely go away and disappear from our scope of history. So despite the original sites being lost, there are other ways for archives to preserve sites that we lose. One method of this is by reconstructing the site in a different location. This relates to the construction of a new site with the same form, features, and detailing of the previous site, so that it is replicative of both the appearance as well as the period of time it was built in. So overall, this remains part of its historical integrity, as people can still see its important aspects despite it not being the original location or the original building. Another method used to help preserve sites we lose is through conservation. Conservation refers to preserving specific materials so important artifacts left inside the building will keep the historical relevance of the building alive. So this is taking artifacts inside the building to kind of remember, kind of symbolize what that building meant. Another way that we can pass along the story of this historical site that has been lost is through oral traditions. This is another way to preserve sites, as members of the community pass it along to future generations. So as this oral story of of this building keeps going to down from generation to generation, the historical impact of the building will continue to live on in that community as long as the tradition continues. And then overall, this was a great place, and it's kind of upsetting that it has to have been demolished.